teaching from the Rebbe is, let me go. I want to make sure that we come to this one, that we don't skip it, is about Amalek, because this week's portion, Beshalach, also contains it at the passage of Amalek. And Amalek is the one who threatens to destroy the Jewish people. So many people try to understand what was so dangerous about Amalek. Why was Amalek an existential threat to the Jewish people? Why do we have to remember to defeat them at all times? So it's interesting to me how the Rebbe understands Amalek. So it says in the verse, in chapter 17, verse 8, Vayomer Moshe El Yoshua B'char lanu anashim. Vayavo Amalek vayolchem Yisrael b'Refidim. And Amalek came and he waged war against Israel and Refidim. So what does that mean? The physical attack of the nation of Amalek was the outer manifestation of the spiritual attack of the people's inner Amalek. Again, the Rebbe always takes the spiritual approach to the verses. Says, I'm not going to worry about a battle with Amalek, a physical battle. The only reason why there's an outside physical battle is because the people were fighting a war on the inner side, on the inside, against the spiritual Amalek. The only reason why Amalek on the outside represented an external threat to us is because internally we had a struggle. Now here's where he says that the gematria, the numerical value of the word Amalek, ayin is 70, mem is 40, lamed is another 30, that's 140, and then kuf is 100, is 240. And the numerical value is the same as the word safek, which is also a numerical value of 240. So the people, the word safek means to doubt. The people doubted God's involvement in their lives when they said, is God present amongst us or not? Hayesh Hashem bikirbeinu im ayin. That was the verse immediately, that's the words immediately prior to the passage of Amalek attacking. The people expressed doubt whether or not God was in our midst. So basically what the Rebbe is saying is the external threats are only apparent when we have doubts inside of ourselves, when we have this internal doubt about whether or not we're walking with the path of God. And so this is what the Rebbe writes. This inner Amalek continues to plague us today, attempting to sow doubt and cool our religious fervor. It acknowledges that God exists, but tries to convince us that God is too great to care about the details of our Jewish observance. One doubt leads to another, and eventually our inner Amalek convinces us that God is not involved in human life altogether. This in turn causes us to abandon our search for godliness and spirituality. Amalek represents a spiritual threat, not a physical threat. That's what the Rebbe is saying. Yeah, the Amalek does eventually pose an external physical threat, but that's only because the spiritual threat of casting doubt. And this is for sure, the Rebbe instilled this concept of emunah, of faith, of belief into his Hasidim for sure. The concept of belief in the power and the will of Hashem. And if we have this belief, then we can overcome anything. And Amalek represents cynicism and doubt and not believing in the possibilities of a redeemed future. So that's a really, I think, an essential teaching. Anybody who's ever met Chabad Shliach knows that they're living on emunah, they're living on faith, they're living on absolute belief in Hashem. So that's another teaching that I want to share. And we have time for maybe one more. I want to share a teaching because I think it's so significant. I want to share what the Rebbe says about Miriam, the prophetess. It's one of the ways in which, we've spoken about how the Rebbe understood the landscape, understood Judaism in America, or understood culture in America. was certainly with respect to women. Nobody would say that Chabad is egalitarian, but on the other hand, the women have not been sidelined in Chabad Hasidus. Very often, the women are leaders in their own right in the dynamics of a shlichus, of men and women who go out to serve their community, and the women are playing a spiritual role and inspiring and teaching. It's very often the case. Number two, when the Rebbe started his campaign to put tefillin on the men, he also started a campaign to give Jewish girls candlesticks. And this campaign continues today, that they'll give out candlesticks. If you walk out of the train in New York City, in Penn Station, you'll see Chabad Shluchim just standing there in the street, waiting to give candlesticks out so people can light the Shabbos candles. And in fact, today, I don't think it goes on anymore because nobody buys the print anymore. But for many years, it said the candle lighting time on Friday afternoon in the newspaper of the New York Times on the front page. The front page. How many of us who grew up in New York remember that? And you notice that because that was it. That was from the Rebbe. That was the Rebbe. And the Rebbe understood that women need to be included as well. It wasn't by any stretch adopting, egalitarian, but he was including the women. And in fact, the first Orthodox institution, I think, to teach women Gemara was in the Chabad schools for women, that they were studying the Gemara. So the Rebbe understood that we have to engage both with males and females. And this is another area which certainly separates him from classic Hasidic Rebbes. So I wanted to see, what does the Rebbe say about the verse? Vatan Miriam, that Miriam took the timbrels in her hand, and she went out, and all the women followed her with tupim mecholot. And Miriam responded to them, sing to a song, sing to God. So the Rebbe writes, the joy of women surpassed that of the men. The women and the men both sang, but it was only the women who danced and drummed as well. This was because the women, led by Miriam, felt the bitterness of the exile more intensely than did the men. Miriam's very name expressed the bitterness of the exile. Mar is bitter. Her sensitivity to the pain of the exile led her to the prophecy of the birth of Moses. Miriam is the one who had that prophecy, and to take an active interest in her prophecy's fulfillment. Because her anguish over the exile and her yearning for its end was so great, her joy over being liberated surpassed the men's. So that's the Rebbe writing about Miriam and her prophecy. Just thought it was very, very significant that the Rebbe, when we talk about the Rebbe, we could talk about his vision, and that vision included women as well. All right, so I will stop the recording here. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them. Any questions at this point?